Love that song. It's a great song. It's a good reminder as we, at least here in this church, are looking forward to a building project. I think everyone's looking forward to it. I certainly am. It's certainly been on my mind a lot, but there's a much more important building being built as we speak. And Jesus said, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." And he went on to say that I go and prepare a place for you. Right now, construction is being done on our eternal habitation, and it's going to be fantastic. I just put in a check tonight to the offering. Someone gave a check this past week who's, again, not a member of this church, do not attend this church, but they decided to contribute to this ministry. So praise the Lord for that. And I'll encourage you to join them in supporting the work here. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. We are coming to the end kind of quickly. It seems like we're doing a chapter each time, which I'm fine with. But we are approaching the end of Ecclesiastes. My plan is, just to give you a heads up, when I'm done with Ecclesiastes, we'll be going through in Sunday evening services a series of lessons, I think about 20 of them or so, on the King James Bible. It'll be called KJV 101, and something that I want to do every 5 years or so, just so everyone understands our position here at the church. And I did it in Sunday school, I think 6 or 7 years ago, but I was going to do that in Sunday school. Number one, I don't know if we'll ever finish Old Testament Judaism. But number two, I wanted to make sure all of the young people are in for this. So I didn't want the teenagers to miss out on this opportunity. I think it's important for our teenagers and our college and career people to get a grasp on why we use and believe so passionately that the King James Bible is the Word of God, and hope it will be a help to you. It'll be more lessons, but it will be good for you. So that's what's coming next, Lord willing. But we'll finish up Ecclesiastes here in the coming weeks. Let's start by letting me read Deuteronomy 6:7. Deuteronomy 6:7. It's a verse that's repeated twice with a little bit of variation in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses said these words to the people, referring to the commandments and the precepts of the law. He said to the parents, he said, "Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." Moses telling the Israelite parents, moms and dads, all the commandments that God has given to you, all the precepts that God has given to you, I think Moses said you should teach them diligently to your children. When you're in your house, teach these things diligently. When you're walking down the street, on the way to the store, driving to the ball game, of course we understand they wouldn't drive, but wherever they were going, teach these things. When you get up, teach these things. When you go to bed, teach these things. Moses didn't want the Jewish moms and dads to assume that it was the priest's job to teach their children these laws. In New Testament language, he didn't want the parents of Israel to depend on the Sunday school teachers to provide the spiritual instruction for their children. Moses knew what any good parent knows, and that is a parent's influence is the greatest influence any young child can have. Now that influence decreases when they get into the pre-teenage years and the teenage years. That influence decreases substantially, but you still have the potential for being the most influential person in your child's life. Without question, in those early years, the years 7, 8, up to there, a parent can be the most influential, good or bad, can be the most influential person. I recently had told someone that we are formed in the first 7, 8 years of our life, and we spend the rest of our lives either trying to fix that or strengthen that. And it's so true. A parent has such a profound opportunity to be an influence on their children. And I think a good parent who teaches spiritual principles is a child's greatest asset. Greatest asset to a child is being taught biblical principles at a young age. And so it would be wise for every Christian parent to apply Moses' instruction to their parenting. This is something that my wife and I have tried to do in our home over the years without becoming insignificant background noise. And that's a balancing act. If you talk too much and everything is a life lesson, then you become the wah, wah, wah teacher and Charlie Brown. And so it's a balancing act. You have to make sure you're doing more than just talking about spiritual things, lest you become irrelevant to them. And evidently our kids have noticed that recently on a deep spiritual family session of watching Investigation Discovery. Because we get around, it's ID time, given the right show, and so we watch these crimes unfold, and as I often do during these shows, we point out the common denominator for usually the victims. Usually these cases don't start out with, Sue is in church every week, and she was just randomly selected to be murdered. No, it's usually Sue was in the bar, and she met a guy that she shouldn't have met, and next thing you know, an hour later, we find out what happened. So we often point out to our kids the common denominators for these crimes. See where you shouldn't be, see who you shouldn't be hanging around. Look there's money involved, there's drugs involved, there's choosing the wrong people to get romantically involved in. And we do this, and evidently we do it more than we know it, because one of my children recently said, it seems like every time we watch these shows, we get a life lesson. So I filed that in my mind, and it was a few days later that I was helping another one of my children with their homework, and I was trying to express to my child that, they don't need to rely on mom and dad all the time. They're smart enough to figure it out. They can put the time in, and we'll be there to help if you can't figure it out. But you don't need mom and dad to be a crutch for you, so you can do it. Well, while I'm giving this life lesson, I notice this child is slowly backing up to get out of the room. And my other child says, looks like they're not interested in a life lesson. So it's become kind of a joke in our home. You say, what does that have to do with Ecclesiastes 10? This chapter, like much of Solomon's writing, both in Proverbs and in Ecclesiastes, it is a collection of life's lessons. I don't see from beginning to end necessarily a major theme or a clear agenda from Solomon. It's not a chapter where he's saying, my son, listen to me about this. It's written to his readers with no individual in mind. And I'm not going to say they're random thoughts, but they're a collection of life lessons. Things that maybe he's told people over the years, but he decided in his final book, which is a relatively short book, of all the things he could have written about, he chose these things we're about to read. And I don't want you to look at them as though there's some great, deep, doctrinal insight that we'll come to by the end of chapter 10, but look at it rather of just a collection of life lessons, things that are going to apply to everyday living, and things that, like the Kabels watching Investigation Discovery with their kids, can be shared along the way. And what he will do is he will contrast, which is his style, he'll contrast the good with the bad. The bad gives the good greater meaning. By showing the difference, he'll say, look at the bad, and now compare that to the good, and the good seems that much better. Sometimes we make a mistake in not doing that. We tell our children, well, do right, read your Bible, go to church, be honest, do right. And we don't give our children the opportunity to see what happens if you don't do those things. That's why we like to watch some of these shows, because we get a chance to say, now see what they're doing? See what happened? Here's the alternative. Do the right thing. And you're going to avoid those things. So let's read verse number 1. We'll get right into it. Life lesson number 1. There's 6 of them in the chapter. The first one is simple. Heeding wisdom is more important than having wisdom. Heeding wisdom is more important than having wisdom. Verse number 1, Ecclesiastes chapter 10, dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. Now, the apothecary is the ancient pharmacy. The apothecary is where they would mix and make the ointments, the medicines, the perfumes, the lotions. And it was a time-taking process. It would be an expensive process. And one dead fly or a few dead flies that fell into that ointment could ruin all the work that went into it. That's what he's talking about. So in verse number 1, again, dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. Just like a few small flies could ruin an entire bottle or jar of expensive ointment, just a little folly can ruin the reputation of a wise man or a wise woman. An ancient pharmacist can spend hours and hours mixing the ingredients to a perfect consistency and add all the right things and walk away, and if a few gnats or a few flies fall in there, all that work is for nothing. They have to throw that out. It's a waste. And a man or a woman can spend years and years developing a good reputation, doing the right things, having a reputation of honor and wisdom, and then just in a few hours of pleasure or a few moments of not using their head, all of that can go by the wayside. A few flies make ointment to stink. A little bit of folly can make a reputation stink as well. Verse number 2, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left. Now, I realize plenty of you, how many of you are left-handed? Raise your hands. I know Pastor Nugent's, there he is. My mom is a lefty. So there's a number of you. Take no offense to the Bible's position on this. When the Bible refers to right hand, it's referring to power. It's referring to strength. It's referring to a useful hand. And that's, again, not because left-handed people are wrong or different. It's just typically most people, I was surprised to see as many hands go up, but most people are right-handed. And so biblically, whenever you see the right hand mentioned, it's a hand of strength. That's why you hear the phrase, he's my right-hand man. We say that meaning he's a helper. He's someone I can rely on. He's someone I can count on. Or we tell you, hey, I could beat that guy up left-handed. That means you're using your weaker hand. Again, no offense, Arthur. I'm sure your left hand is stronger than my right hand. But biblically, the right hand here, meaning it's the better hand. So a wise man's heart is at his right hand. Isn't Jesus Christ sitting at the right hand of God? You can read the Bible and you'll see references to the right hand as being a really good thing. Think of Jacob, Israel. When he was about to die, Joseph brought in his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. And he couldn't see really well, so Joseph brought the boys in front of the grandfather to put his hand on him. And he knew what he was doing, but Jacob, Israel, put his right hand on Ephraim's head. And it displeased Joseph. Why? Because Ephraim was the second-born. And Joseph wanted his father to put his right hand, the hand of blessing, the hand of power, on the head of Manasseh, because that was supposed to be the blessing. So a wise man having his heart at his right hand means he has his heart in mind. He's conscious of his heart. It's a tool. It's important to him. He's always considering his heart. A left man? Or a fool? A left man. A fool, his heart's at his left. Like, it's there, but it just doesn't matter that much. I'm right-handed, so when I do something, 9 times out of 10, I'm using my right hand. That's what I go to. My left hand, if I need it, it's there. That's how a fool views his heart. And my heart, it's not that big of a deal. If I need it, it's there. But I don't typically look to it. I'm not conscious of it. I don't turn to it. As a result, look at verse 3. Yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. Because a fool doesn't take his heart that seriously, the wisdom he has is useless to him. And without that wisdom, it's clear to everyone, based on what he says and what he does, that he is a fool. Heeding wisdom, listening to wisdom, obeying wisdom is more important than having wisdom. Now in verse number 1, a reputable man who had wisdom, he was known as a wise man, for a brief moment of time didn't heed the wisdom he had, and as a result performed a little folly. And that undid all the good that he did in his lifetime. In verse number 3, a fool man who had some wisdom. Didn't it say that his wisdom failed him? You know what that means? He had some, But because his heart was at his left hand, not a big deal. I'm just going to go with the flow. Whatever feels good, I'll do it. I'm not going to put a lot of thought into my morality, into my character. I've got some wisdom, but it's not that big of a deal. Because it didn't matter to him, it failed him. It was useless to him, and everyone knew that he was a fool. And so what do we learn from these first few verses? We learn that it's not good enough to have wisdom. It's not good enough to learn wisdom. It's not good enough to accrue knowledge. It's not good enough to receive the words of the wise. We have to do more than just possess wisdom. We have to heed wisdom. We have to apply it to our lives. We have to follow it. We have to use it. It's not good enough to be hearers of the word. James said we need to be doers of the word. It's not good enough just to read your Bible. You've got to obey your Bible. It's not good enough just to come to church and hear the preaching. You've got to apply the preaching. It's not good enough to get into the counseling office and get help for your marriage. It's important that you apply that counseling, that you use that counseling. I believe most people, there are exceptions, I understand that, but most people have the wisdom necessary to avoid ruining their lives. Listen to this statement, and I believe you'll find it to be true. Most of the time, we commit folly out of negligence, not out of ignorance. Now, when I prepare these sermons, I have a very good person in mind to help me. The guy in the mirror. When I commit folly, when I sin, when I transgress, when I break a commandment, when I hurt somebody, it's almost never out of ignorance. It's out of negligence. I know better, and so do you. We typically have enough wisdom. We certainly should be growing in our wisdom. We should be accruing more wisdom. We should be learning more. But let's be honest, most of us know what's good and what's not good for us. Most of us know we shouldn't eat 5 pieces of pizza, but it tastes so good. And so we eat 5 pieces of pizza, and we wonder why we get fat. Most of us know what TV shows and movies we should and shouldn't watch. Most of us know what websites we should and shouldn't go to. Most of us know what people we should and shouldn't hang out with. Most of us know what substances we should and shouldn't partake of. Listen, most of us know we shouldn't drink alcohol, including the people who drink alcohol. Why do some people drink it? Why do some people don't? Because a wise man, he always has his heart at his right hand. It's always important to him. A fool, it's not that important, so we'll just do what comes easy, what comes natural. Most of us are smart enough to make the right decisions. We just don't take our spirituality, our morality that seriously. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, Solomon said, "Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." Jesus said, "Watch and pray, lest ye enter into temptation." The person who applies those 2 verses has his heart at his right hand. But most of us, yeah, it's important, but I'll deal with it next Sunday when I get to church. Our heart is at our left. Most Christians who have been saved for any length of time have enough wisdom to make the right decisions and do the right things, especially in our type of church. One of the hardest parts of my job is preparing messages, Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, a devotion on Wednesday night. It's a lot of preparation, which means you get a lot of knowledge, right? Which means most of us don't need help making decisions. We just need to be more conscious of our decisions. Any young person like myself who grew up in a good Christian home, who is in church sitting under the teaching of Pastor Nugent, Paul Chukalski, Steve Barrett, others, for the majority of my childhood, we don't need more knowledge. We just need to be more aware and conscious of our morality. I've met with couples who have been saved their whole life mostly and have been in a church for a long time, and I look at them and say, you don't need the answers. You have them. You just need help implementing them. How many of you parents raised children to see them walk away from the Lord, and you said to yourself 1,000,000 times, they know better? K-N-O-W, they know better. Yeah, they do. They do know better. You don't need to educate them. They've already been educated. Their heart, sadly and tragically, was at their left hand. It just wasn't that important. There are pleasures to enjoy. There are things out there that I'd rather do. It's just not that important. Does that make sense? We assume a fool has no wisdom. They're deprived of any wisdom whatsoever. No, they have wisdom. Not as much as a wise man. The difference between a wise man and a fool is the wise man is ever learning and ever heeding. Foolish man is not that important. Christian couples fail in their marriage not out of ignorance, but out of spiritual negligence. Young people, young believers get into harmful and devastating romantic relationships not out of ignorance, but out of spiritual negligence. It's not good enough to know what to do to get the answers. We must choose to do what we know is the right thing to do. All right, so that would be number one. Heeding wisdom is more important than having wisdom. Life lesson number 2 in the passage is this: conserving relationships is more important than correcting rulers. And we'll explain that through the passage. Conserving relationships is more important than correcting rulers. Verse number 4, Solomon writes, if the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. Again, if you're reading this and you're thinking this has nothing to do with verses 1, 2, and 3, in many ways you're right. It all applies somewhere, somehow, but this is a collection of thoughts to help you through life. If the spirit of a ruler rise up against thee, if a spirit or a ruler is angry with you, frustrated with you, mad at you, leave not thy place. Don't walk away. Don't turn your back to him. Don't pretend it doesn't matter. Don't ignore it with the hopes it will go away. Leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. Yielding appeases great offenses. Humility breeds peace. You know what walking away is? And we often misunderstand this because we think we're being the bigger man or the stronger person to walk away from an argument, to walk away from contention, to walk away from a problem. You know what it is? It's a really sophisticated manifestation of pride. We justify it by saying, well, I don't want to make things worse. But what we're really saying is, I don't have to put up with this. Amen. The reason I say that is because guys do this. This is a guy thing. Right, guys? When mama ain't happy and she's going after our heels, we just say it, and I'm going to walk away. That's what we do. We think we're responsible. No, we don't want to put up with it. We think we're above that. So guys walk, as I say, girls talk. Guys walk, girls, when there's tension and contention, guys walk away, they don't want to deal with it, and girls keep talking to try to talk their way through it. The talk usually is not very nice in tension and contention, but they're both a manifestation of pride. No one wants to yield, and no one gets pacified. Pride is what makes things worse every time. And so what is the thing to do? It's yielding, it's humility, it's bowing, it's allowing for the offense to go away, not having to be right, not having to prove ourselves or defend ourselves, but yielding. Now, he mentions a ruler here because Solomon, being the king, understands how dangerous it is to turn your back to a king, to authority, how disrespectful it is, and what that will do with the relationship you have with the authority. So we don't have kings here. You're not very close to President Trump, I'm sure, but we all have bosses. We all have employers. We all have parents. We all have governors, politicians. There are people of authority in our lives. And if that authority has a spirit that's against you or struggling with you, don't turn your back to them. Don't walk away from them. Don't be disrespectful. That's not going to help your relationship with them. And if you don't have a relationship, a good one with authority, you're going to struggle. Verse number 5, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Here's the error. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. Rulers make a mistake by taking people who are guilty of folly, who are fools, who do mischievous things, and they promote them to a high position in their administration or their cabinet. Then they take the rich, the people who have proven themselves responsible, the people who have proven themselves successful, and they demote them to low places. That's a mistake. Verse 7, Solomon says, I have seen servants upon horses and princes walking as servants upon the earth. Solomon says, I've seen servants riding horses when they should have been serving in the basement. I've seen princes walking as servants when they should have been riding horses as rulers. What is he saying? Rulers make mistakes. Rulers can be poor judges of character. Rulers can be corrupt and show respect of persons and judgment. Leaders may get angry at you for no reason. Leaders may get angry at you because of someone else's mistake. Leaders may get angry at you even for a good cause. And in any case, regardless of what the ruler is doing, regardless of what your authority feels towards you, Solomon says, do yourself a favor. Yield. Be humble. Don't think so highly of yourself. Why? Because it will preserve your relationship with that leader, which is necessary for us to lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness. Leaders at your company, leaders in your family, leaders in your church, leaders in your community, they may promote the wrong people. They may promote the wrong people that are put over you, and they may promote the wrong people instead of promoting you. This is a life lesson. Focus on conserving the relationships with the leaders in your life rather than feeling the need to correct those leaders. I don't think he's suggesting that you may not have a good reason to correct or confront the authority in your life. I think Solomon the Aged is simply suggesting that you choose your battles in life. Leaders very rarely will back down to a fight and choose to pick the battle so you can live to fight another day. Here's one of the greatest life lessons that so few of us want to learn. It's not complicated, it's not difficult to grasp, we just don't like it, but it's this. Being humble will get you so much farther in life than being right. Yielding produces a much better life than yelling. Bowing your head is so much better for your reputation than pointing the finger. Having to be right all the time, proving that you're right and they're wrong, that will bring you a lot of unnecessary trouble and conflict. If you're a humble person, you'll be blessed with a lot of good relationships, and as a result, your quality of life will be high. But if you're the guy that has to be right all the time, good luck. Because you are the most unlikable person in the world. Be the woman that has to be right. You've got to have the final word. You've got to put everybody in their place. Enjoy your life being very lonely. You will get nothing but resistance. Doesn't the Bible say that God resisteth the proud? Can I be honest with you? So does man. I've been in sessions with people, with couples, that I say to myself, why am I wasting my breath? You have all the answers. Good luck to you. But the people that say, help me, Pastor, well, you're real likable. Humility is just likable. Yield. It pacifies great offenses. Puts a pacifier in the mouth of trouble. All right, number 3. This is not a new one. Here we go. Working smarter is more important than working harder. Verse number 8, he that diggeth a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh an hedge, a serpent shall bite him. If you're strong enough to dig a pit, be careful that you don't fall in it. If you're strong enough to break down a stone hedge, be careful that a serpent doesn't bite you. If you're blessed with the ability to work hard, that's a good thing. But note that there are a lot of risks and dangers to working hard. It's real easy to get hurt on the job site. Verse 9, whoso removeth stones shall be hurt therewith, and he that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. If you're strong enough to run equipment to remove stones, then you're doing something that could lead to injury. If you're strong enough to wield an axe, then you're doing something that could very easily lead to injury. Verse 10, if the iron be blunt, if it's not sharp, and he do not whet or sharpen the edge, then must he put to more strength. But Solomon says, wisdom is profitable to direct. In other words, if you don't have wisdom, and you get to working hard, you're going to use an axe because it's nearby and you're just going to work hard. But if that axe isn't sharp, you're going to have to work harder than you would have needed to, which is going to lead to the potential for more injury, strain your backs, pull a muscle, perhaps get tired quicker and not use your mind. And then next thing you know, you're chopping your toe off. Verse number 11, surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. What does he mean there? He means at this time, we don't have it in the Western world, but snake charming is a real thing. In the Middle East, they know how to charm or tame a snake. We see, maybe it's an Indiana Jones, but the Middle Eastern man playing the instrument and the cobra comes up out of the basket, and they're able to play with snakes. We don't do that here. Please don't do that here. Don't bring the snakes here. But he's saying if you don't enchant, if you don't charm the snake, it's going to bite you. And a person who is used to handling snakes, if they think they can take a break from their charming and handle a snake, they're making a mistake. Even if they're talking to the snake, a babbler's no better. You've got to use enchantment with a snake. Wisdom would help you understand if you're digging a pit, you've got to be careful. Wisdom would tell you if you're removing a hedge, you've got to watch out for the viper. If you're moving stones, you've got to be careful with those things. If you're cutting wood, you've got to sharpen your blade. Make sure you know what you're doing. If you're handling a snake, you can't take any chances with a wild beast. Working smarter is more important than working harder. Life lesson, not necessarily applicable to the ruler and the spirit of the ruler, but again, a life lesson. This is an important lesson because people with abilities often rely on their abilities. The strong rely on their strength. The smart, intellectual person relies on their intellect. The experienced, they rely on their experience. The swift rely on their speed. But any job, any work, any labor, any effort done without wisdom will easily result in harm. Rather than rush into a job, the aged king advises us to take wisdom with us. Rather than do what comes easy to us, consult with wisdom first. Ladies, how many times have you burnt yourself in the kitchen because you're doing what comes natural and you're moving quick and then you burn yourself because you're moving too quick? You're not taking time to think through everything you're doing. Guys, how many times you're in the garage and you do something similar, either burning yourself on the car or pinching your finger on the machine or hitting your finger with the hammer? We've all done it because we're moving too quick. We're relying on ourselves. Solomon says, slow down. Wisdom is profitable to direct. Without wisdom, you'll fall into that pit and be out of work for a while. Without wisdom, you'll get bit by a serpent and have to go to the ER. Without wisdom, you'll have to spend a lot more time cutting that wood. Without wisdom, you'll take your eyes off the machine for a second and have an accident. So for a higher quality of life, for a more enjoyable quality of life, for a more productive life, work harder. Work smarter rather, not harder. Call the utility company before digging. Check the wall before swinging. Knock before opening. Sharpen the axe before swinging. Consult with the lawyer before signing. Wisdom is profitable to direct. Number 4, life lesson number 4. The use of the mind is more important than the use of the mouth. We cannot be reminded of this lesson enough, right? You read the book of Proverbs, it seems like every other proverb is shut up. Shut up. We should just have a book called Shut Up. It would just be so smart. But we need to be reminded because our mouths move so much easier and quicker than our ears seem to move. Let's find out what happens. Verse number 12. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. That's where you get the phrase, you're digging yourself a hole. Verse 13. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. He starts out by just yakking, nothing to talk about, no substance, no value whatsoever. And by the time he's done yakking, now he's actually recommended mischief. Now he's into full-blown, you know what, let's go over and do that. Or, yeah, let's go do that to so-and-so. The beginning is foolishness, the end is mischievous madness. Verse 14. A fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be, and what shall be after him? Who can tell? Now, this fool here, he's full of words, no substance, no knowledge, nothing worth taking seriously. He's constantly boasting himself of the future, what he's going to do, what he's going to make happen. He talks, and there lack plenty of credibility in his words. He makes all kinds of bets and predictions, all of which are foolish because who can know the future? It's a waste of time to predict the future. Fools tell you what they think is going to happen. Verse 15, the labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them. Solomon says sarcastically, because he doesn't even know how to go to the city. Because he knoweth not how to go to the city. When a fool actually has to work, it wearies every one of them. Every fool, when he starts the work, he gets exhausted, he gets frustrated because he doesn't know how to do the simplest task. He gets tired quickly when working because he lacks the wisdom that is profitable direct. Who picks up the axe to start cutting wood without looking at the blade? A fool. So guess what? He gets real tired real quick. And he says, this is dumb anyways. Who needs to cut wood? And throws the axe down and goes and finds somebody to talk to. A fool just talks, and never learns. The use of the mind is more important than the use of the mouth. You know, you can't listen and talk at the same time. It's one or the other. So more talking means less listening. Less listening means less learning. Less learning means more foolishness. More foolishness means more weariness because you don't know how to do the simplest of tasks. Why is a wise man's words gracious? Why mention a wise man's words are gracious in this passage and then go off about the fool and how he can't even do the simplest things? Well, because a wise man uses his mind more than his mouth. And a wise man thinks more than he speaks. And a wise man looks out through the world and he looks at people and he sees that life is cruel, life is difficult. A wise man thinks about how some people have it real hard. He sees how precious relationships are. He realizes there's no guarantees in life. A wise man sits back and sees somebody who's failing and in his heart says, yeah, I've had my own failures. I know my own shortcomings. I know my own sins. I know my own problems. And so when he speaks, he is gracious with his words because he uses his head more than his mouth. A fool, he's hasty, he's rash, he's bold, he's harsh, and ultimately mischievous because he doesn't think. He just speaks. And so James in the New Testament says, let every man be slow to speak, swift to hear. Oh, and by the way, that will lead to you being slow to anger. Good instruction from both Solomon and James. Number five, gentlemen, pay attention. Responsible leadership is more important than recreational leadership. Verse 16, woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child, and thy princes eat in the morning. Whoa, is Solomon against breakfast? Is he against the breakfast of champions? Why is Solomon saying, woe to the land whose king is a child and the princes eat in the morning? He's not referring, by the way, to the age of the leader. He's referring to the maturity level of the leader. He says, you poor land, if you have a king who's immature. You poor land, if you have princes who are feasting and drinking in the morning, if they're relishing in their food and beverage before they even get to work. A land is cursed when they have leaders who want to party instead of doing the hard work that comes with ruling. A land is cursed when their leaders are playboys and not responsible leaders. Listen, we have a lot of aged men in our capital, in this country. But we have found over the years that some of them are more interested in partying than they are in leading. See, it's not age that matters, it's the maturity level. And if a land is cursed because of those politicians, we need to pray for our politicians. Verse 17 gives a little context to that first verse. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. Solomon's observations, again, have nothing to do with the age of the king or with the time when the princes eat. His observations have to do with the character of the leaders of a land. And a land needs responsibility. It needs responsibility in the capital, not recreation. Oh, sure, eat, drink, and be merry, but not at the expense of being responsible. Verse 18, by much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands the house droppeth through. By much slothfulness the building decayeth, and by idleness of hands just sitting there, the house drops right through the ground. Leaders who are lazy ruin a nation the same way homeowners who are lazy ruin a home. Leaders who are idle ruin a land the same way homeowners who are idle ruin a home. Verse 19, a feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. This was a difficult verse to figure out how it applied to the passage. But after thinking about it for some time, I believe this verse refers to the irresponsibility of the king who is a child and the irresponsibility of the princes who eat in the morning. These guys feast in the morning. They give themselves to wine in order to laugh and to be merry. But in so doing, they take the nation's money and irresponsibly manage it in order to pay for their luxuries. They tax the people in order to spend their days feasting and drinking together. The tragedy is the money that they're using for feasting, the money they're using for partying, it can be used for all other things. Money answereth all things. A feast is just for laughter. Wine is just for being merry. That's all that does. Eating is just to have a good time. But money, you see, that can be used to put medicine into the lives of the sick. Money, the taxes you're receiving, that can be used to pave the streets. It can be used to help the VA. It can be used to help the soldiers. It can be used to help the needy. Money, it can do a lot more than feasting and wine. And slothful, idle, immature party boy leaders, they misuse and mismanage the money of the people. Responsible leadership is more important than recreational leadership. Woe to a country whose leaders are immature and more concerned with a life of luxury than they are with leading. But let's make it personal. Woe to a home whose leaders are immature and more concerned with a life of entertainment than they are with leading. That's where the passage can be very practical. Young ladies who are not yet married, listen very carefully. Are all you young ladies listening who are not married? You will not be happy if you marry a man who is more concerned about recreation than he is about responsibility. Young ladies, you will not be happy if you marry a man who is more concerned with sports than he is about responsibility. Young ladies, you will not be happy if you marry a man who is more concerned with video games than he is about being responsible. You will not be happy if you marry a man who is more concerned with having fun than he is about being responsible. Young ladies, when you start to look for an available man, please look at his bedroom. What does it look like? Look in his car. What does it look like? What does he spend his money on? What does his resume look like? And remember, by much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of hands the house droppeth through. If that good-looking, fun boy sees money as a way to recreate, feast, and have fun, then home ownership will not be for him. Now, I concede everyone likes someone who is fun. But if that comes at the expense of being responsible, your marriage will not be fun. Everyone likes someone who's entertaining. But if that comes at the expense of being responsible, then that marriage or that organization or that church will not be very enjoyable. Responsible leadership is more important than recreational leadership. Are you saying we can't have fun, preacher? Hey, have all the fun in the world. But make sure it comes after doing what's important for your home. Can I go to the game? Absolutely. Just make sure things are done before you go to the game. And things are paid for before you go do what you want to do. All you ladies can say amen later on for those young ladies who are looking. Life lesson number 6 will be done. Preserving your opinion is more important than expressing your opinion. This is a great verse. We're going to finish with verse 20. Ready? Solomon says, who is a king, curse not the king. No, not in thy thought. And curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. This is where the phrase "a little birdie told me" came from. And no, Solomon is not suggesting that Disney has it all figured out and animals talk and, carry messages to the king. He's not suggesting that a literal bird will take your message and deliver it to the king. He's simply pointing out what most of us know, we just often forget. Word travels very quick. Especially if it's a curse, if it's a critical opinion of somebody. Because I think it's hilarious around here. This may surprise you, but not everybody agrees with me all the time. And it's amazing because it gets back to me. And if I talk to the person about it in a fun way, because very rarely will I get upset about something, but I'll poke about it and have fun, they'll always say, "How did you find out?" Like, whoever you told someone else who told me. Is that difficult? You know why? Because people love to spread drama. They love to spread dirt. There's a whole industry. I think it's called the media. That's built upon it. Did you hear what so-and-so said? We talk about it for a year and it passes on. If you're going to say something that could impactfully hurt somebody else, it's going to be shared. So Solomon says, save yourself some trouble and don't even think about it. Because if you're willing to think it, you're willing to say it. Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. If it's in there, and you're thinking about it all the time, eventually you're going to say it. Yeah, well, I only talk to my wife or my husband in our bedchamber about it. If you're willing to talk to them, you're willing to talk to somebody else. Oh, and by the way, your spouse may tell their best friend, and they may say, don't tell anybody. All that is encouraging them to tell somebody else. I mean, this is juicy. Get ready. You're not going to be able to handle it, but don't tell anybody. And you don't want a king getting wind of your curse. Now, when Solomon writes this, he's writing from the perspective of a monarchy. So a lot of what we read in the Scripture is from that perspective. And we don't appreciate that here in the Western world. But if you upset the king in a monarchy, he can just put your head on a stump and have the Grim Reaper take it off. That's a monarchy. We're in a democracy. And we've gone so far from the respect a king deserves, as outlined in the Scripture, that now we have an entire industry that is based upon cursing the president. It's called late night TV. It's fun to make fun of our leaders. And then we have talk show radio all day that we just curse the president, curse the politicians. And we have to be careful because we get caught up in that, especially with the divided politics of our land. But Romans 13 still applies. We are to render to our government that which is due them, and honor is due to any power that be, because God ordained them. And so Solomon's saying, don't even think it. A, it could get back to the king, and that can make your life very difficult. But B, God can read your thoughts, and God will not appreciate you cursing the king. So preserving your opinion is more important than expressing it. Why preserve it? So you can change it. You know, when you say something bad about someone else, let's say, for example, I say, I come up with a good one here. Pastor Phil, I'm trying to embarrass you without in any way having people take it seriously. But let's say I told Harold tonight after church that Pastor Phil, he has a hygiene problem. And I can't stand work with him because he smells bad. Now, if I say that to Harold, even though he's a great guy, he's going to tell Phyllis. And even though Phyllis is a great lady, she's going to tell her daughter. And her daughter's going to tell someone, and it's going to get back to Pastor Phil. And do you know I can never change that opinion again the rest of my life? I may tell him, oh, no, you don't smell bad, you smell really good. By the way, I hope you enjoy the cologne I got for you for Christmas. 20 years from now, I can say, really, he smells good now. He's showering more often, and he's using more aftershave. But you know what? For the rest of my life, Harold, Phyllis, and at least Pastor Phil are going to hold me accountable to that opinion. If I don't share it, and even though I might think it for a moment, guess what I get to do? I get to change that opinion. So if you learn not to say it, you can change it. And then down the road, you can change it, which is, you know why that's important? Because time has a way of altering our opinions, doesn't it? Think about, those of you who are parents, think about how critical you were of other parents before you became a parent. I'll never do that. My kid will never be that way. Then you have children. And then all of a sudden you have a different opinion, don't you? You may be able to criticize leaders until God puts you into leadership. So learn to preserve your opinion so you can ultimately reshape it. And failure is one of the best ways of reshaping the opinions of others. We can be arrogant. I think of the rich here. He talks about cursing not the rich in thy bedchamber. Why would we curse the rich? Think about it. Well, we sit back and say, look at how the rich manage their money. Look at what they do with their money. And I would be careful because God may give you a whole bunch of money. And it will slay you because so few people can handle it. And you might learn that lesson the hard way, and for the rest of your life, you're not going to judge the rich. You're going to say, oh, God, have mercy on me. You're going to say what the author of Proverbs 30 said, Father, feed me with food convenient with me, lest I be full and forget thee, or lest I be poor and curse thee. So don't curse the rich. You don't know what it's like to have all that money. You don't know what it's like to have everybody bang on your door for a piece of it. You don't know what it's like to be challenged with all the temptations that come with it. Just preserve your opinion. In fact, give it to God. And maybe down the road, you can have one where it matters. Remember, a fool is full of talk. His heart is at his left hand. He uses his mouth more than his mind. And remember this in closing. In light of verse 20, in cursing the king or cursing the rich or thinking and saying something about someone that you shouldn't, remember this. Dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly. Just saying something when you shouldn't. A little folly, him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. Ecclesiastes 10, a collection of life's lessons. Let's stand and have a word of prayer.